Good morning Year 6 and welcome to Tuesday's book talk session. In today's session we're going to start chapter 2 and be thinking what happened at the end of chapter 1 and what your predictions were and whether they came true. Okay, let's start with going to our reading rainbow. Okay, our first reason for reading today, and from the fantastic Tier, is the imagining lens, this one here. And I want you to be thinking, whilst I read the next bit of text, what is Alex Rider thinking? What's going on in his mind? So chapter 2 is called Heaven for Cars. Why do you think Anthony Horowitz has given it that title? Let's have a look. With Hammersmith Bridge just ahead of him, Alex left the river and swung his bike through the lights and down the hill towards Brookland School. The bike was a Condor Junior road racer, custom built for him on his 12th birthday. It was a teenager's bike with a cut-down Reynolds 531 frame, but the wheels were full size, so he could ride at speed with hardly any rolling resistance. He spun past a Mini and cut through the school gates. He would be sorry when he grew out of the bike. For 2 years now it had almost been part of him. He double-locked it in the shed and went into the yard. Brookland was a new comprehensive. Red brick and glass, modern and ugly. Alex could have gone to any of the smart private schools around Chelsea, but Ian Ryder had decided him to send him here. He had said it would be more of a challenge. Why do you think Anthony Horowitz wants to include that bit in? What did he mean about it being more of a challenge? The first lesson of the day was maths. When Alex came into the classroom, the teacher, Mr. Donovan, was already scribbling on the whiteboard, setting out a complicated equation. It was hot in the room, the sunlight streaming in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, put in by architects who should have known better. As Alex took his place near the back, he wondered how he was going to get through the lesson. How could he possibly think about algebra when there were so many other questions churning through his mind? Do you know what's bothering him at the moment? What's going through his head? The gun at the funeral, the way Blunt had looked at him, the van with Stryker and Son written on the side, the empty office, and the biggest question of all, the one detail that refused to go away, the seatbelt. Ian Ryder hadn't been wearing a seatbelt, but of course he had. Ian Ryder had never been one to give lectures. He had always said Alex should make up his own mind about things, but he had this thing about seatbelts. The more Alex thought about it, the less he believed it. A collision at a roundabout. Suddenly he wished he could see the car. At least the wreckage would tell him that the accident had really happened, that Ian Ryder really had died that way. Alex? Alex looked up and realised that everyone was staring at him. Mr. Donovan had just asked him something. He quickly scanned the whiteboard, taking in the figures. "Yes, sir," he said. "X equals 7 and Y is 15. The maths teacher sighed. "Yes, Alex, you're absolutely right, but actually I was just asking you to open the window." I'm going to leave it there and go back to our rainbow. So we're going to take this imagining lens I want to focus on this one. So it's all about what's going on in Alex's mind. So we learn about the inner thoughts of the character when, and just focusing on that bit I've just read. So 1 mark for using that sentence starter, another for answering it, a 3rd mark for finding a short bit of a quote to support what you're thinking, what you're saying, and the bonus word perceive. To perceive something. So pause the video. This is your first sentence for today. Okay, let's go back to the rainbow. Our second reason for reading, and it's about joining the dots together, so to speak, this logical meaning making. So while I'm reading the next bit, be thinking what connections can we put together as to what might be happening. Somehow he managed to get through the rest of the day, but by the time the final bell rang, his mind was made up. While everyone else streamed out, he made his way to the secretary's office and borrowed a local directory. "What are you looking for?" the secretary asked. Jane Bedfordshire was a young woman in her 20s, and she always had a soft spot for Alex. "Breakers' yards." Alex flicked through the pages. "If a car got smashed up near Old Street, they'd take it somewhere nearby, wouldn't they?" "I suppose so." "Here." Alex had found the yards listed under car dismantlers, but there were dozens of them fighting for attention over 4 pages. "Is this for a school project?" the secretary asked. She knew Alex had lost a relative, but not how. "Sort of." Alex was reading the addresses, but they told him nothing. And when this book was written, before the internet was used for most things, you would have had to go somewhere and get a big book like that, really thick, like Yellow Pages you might have heard of, where you'd find numbers for companies in there, and that's how you'd find the phone numbers to phone them, rather than just being able to put it into Google. "This one's quite near Old Street." Miss Bedfordshire pointed at the corner of the page. "Wait!" Alex tugged the book towards him and looked at the entry underneath the one the secretary had chosen. "J.B. Stryker, Heaven for Cars. J.B. Stryker, Auto Breakers, Lambeth Walk, London. Telephone, call us today." "That's in Vauxhall," Miss Bedfordshire said. "Not too far from here." "I know," but Alex recognised the name. J.B. Stryker. He thought back to the van he had seen outside his house on the day of the funeral. Stryker and Son. Of course, it might just be a coincidence, but it was still somewhere to start. He closed the book. "I'll see you, Miss Bedfordshire. Be careful how you go." The secretary watched Alex leave, wondering why she had said that. Maybe it was his eyes, dark and serious. There was something dangerous there. Then the phone rang, and she forgot about him, and she went back to work. And I'm going to pause it there. Let's go back to our rainbow. Okay, so we're going to go into our logical meaning making, and we're going to focus on this bit, which I think we've had before as well, but I think it's quite good for this section. So the author focused on different aspects in varying detail. One part, so from the section I've just read, I want you to focus on one part. And why is Anthony Horowitz focusing on that one bit, and what is it showing? So 1 point for using that sentence starter, another point for finishing it, a third point for finding me evidence from the text, and your bonus word is deliberate. If you're doing something on purpose and you're making a deliberate decision to do it, does that help you with explaining your answer? So this is your second sentence today. So pause the video, write it down, and then we'll move on. Okay, hopefully you got something down for that one. Let's go back. Our final reason for reading today, and normally we'd go to that bottom tier, but with the next bit there's some really nice setting description which is really significant and helps to take the next bit of the story forward. So I'm wanting to focus on this setting lens. So whilst I'm reading it to you, be thinking, how is Michael Morpurgo describing the setting? J.B. Stryker's was a square of wasteland behind the railway tracks running out of Waterloo Station. The area was enclosed by a high brick wall topped with broken glass and razor wire. 2 wooden gates hung open, and from the other side of the road Alex could see a shed with a security window, and beyond it the tottering piles of dead and broken cars. Anything of any value had been stripped away, and only the rusting carcasses remained, heaped one on top of the other, waiting to be fed into the crusher. There was a guard sitting in the shed, reading The Sun. In the distance, a crane coughed into life and then roared down on a battered Ford Mondeo. Its metal his metal claw smashing through the window to scoop up the vehicle and carry it away. A phone rang somewhere in the shed, and the guard turned round to answer it. That was enough for Alex. Holding his bike and wheeling it along beside him, he sprinted through the gates. He found himself surrounded by dirt and debris. The smell of diesel was thick in the air, and the roar of the engines was deafening. Alex watched as the crane swooped down on another of the cars, seized it in a metallic grip and dropped it into a crusher. For a moment the car rested on a pair of shelves, then the shelves lifted up, toppling the car over and down into a trough. The operator, sitting in a glass cabin at one end of the crusher, pressed a button, and there was a great belch of black smoke. The shelves closed in on the car like a monster insect folding in its wings. There was a grinding sound as the car was crushed until it was no bigger than a rolled-up carpet. Then the operator threw a gear and the car was squeezed out. Metallic toothpaste being chopped up by a hidden blade. The slicers tumbled onto the ground. Leaving his bike propped against the wall, Alex ran further into the yard, crouching down behind the wrecks. With the din from the machines, there was no chance that anyone would hear him, but he was still afraid of being seen. He stopped to catch his breath, drawing a grimy hand across his face. His eyes were watering from the diesel fumes. The air was as filthy as the ground beneath him. So lots of really powerful setting description there. Let's go back to our rainbow for our final section today. Okay, so we click on the setting lens. And I wanted us to focus on this because I think it's really powerful and it helps to set the scene. So we're going to go with this one. Description used by the author to set the scene evokes. What does it help us to imagine what's going on, and which description are you going to focus on? So 1 mark for using that sentence, another for answering it, a 3rd mark for finding the right bit of that setting description. That shows what you mean. And our bonus word today is style. I think that links quite nicely. You can talk about Anthony Horowitz's style, or the style of this particular chapter. So pause the video and write down your answer. This is your 3rd and final sentence for today's book talk session. Thank you, Year 6. See you again soon.